The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through my entire life. But it wasn't the sound of my sister's sentencing that made my heart stop. It was what happened next. The judge looked up from his bench, his eyes scanning the packed courtroom until they found mine in the back row. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Excuse me, are you Fire Chief Rodriguez? I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." I never thought I'd be sitting in a courtroom watching my own sister get sentenced, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and for the past 8 years, I've been the Fire Chief of Millbrook County, a position that came with respect, responsibility, and more sleepless nights than I care to count. But sitting in that courthouse that Tuesday morning, none of that seemed to matter to the people who were supposed to matter most. My family had always seen me as the disappointment, the black sheep, the one who couldn't quite measure up to their expectations. While my sister Carmen sailed through law school and landed a prestigious position at a downtown firm, I was crawling through burning buildings and making what my mother called questionable life choices. Carmen was everything they wanted in a daughter: polished, articulate, successful in ways they could brag about at dinner parties. I was the one who came home covered in soot, smelling like smoke, with stories they didn't want to hear. The irony wasn't lost on me that Carmen, their golden child, was now the one facing federal fraud charges while I sat in the gallery, having taken time off from running a department of 63 firefighters to support her. But family is family, even when they've spent years making you feel like you're not quite good enough. Growing up in the Rodriguez household meant living under a microscope of expectations. My father, Miguel, was a respected accountant who believed success came in 3 forms: a college degree, a corner office, and a salary that could support a family without breaking a sweat. My mother, Isabella, was a high school principal who measured achievement in terms of social status and community recognition. They had mapped out perfect lives for both their daughters, and Carmen had followed that map to the letter. I, on the other hand, had torn up the map and forged my own path through the wilderness. It started in high school when I joined the volunteer fire department instead of the debate team. While Carmen was winning speech competitions and padding her college applications with prestigious internships, I was learning how to operate a ladder truck and studying emergency medical procedures. My parents tolerated it as a phase, something I'd grow out of once I came to my senses and chose a real career. But I never grew out of it. If anything, I grew into it. After high school, while Carmen headed off to Harvard, I enrolled in the local community college for fire science and emergency management. The disappointment in my parents' eyes was palpable. They'd saved money for my education, expecting to pay for university tuition, not what my father dismissively called, quote, playing with fire trucks. The conversations at family dinners became strained, filled with thinly veiled suggestions that I reconsider my choices, that there was still time to get serious about my future. Carmen, meanwhile, was thriving. She graduated summa cum laude, passed the bar exam on her first try, and joined Whitmore, Sterling & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. She bought a sleek downtown condo, drove a luxury sedan, and dated men who wore expensive suits and had titles that impressed our parents. She was living proof that their parenting had worked, at least 50% of the time. I was living proof that sometimes children don't turn out the way you planned. My first real job was with the county fire department as a rookie firefighter. The pay was decent, but it wasn't lawyer money. The hours were unpredictable, and the work was dangerous. More than once, my mother would call after seeing news reports about house fires or accident scenes, worried that I might have been involved. But she never called to congratulate me when our department received commendations for our response times, or when we successfully rescued a family from a burning apartment complex. The turning point in my relationship with my family came during my 3rd year on the force. I was working on a structure fire in an old warehouse district when part of the ceiling collapsed. 3 of my colleagues were trapped, and I made the decision to go in after them despite orders to wait for backup. I managed to get all 3 out safely, but not before sustaining 2nd-degree burns on my left arm and shoulder. The incident made local news, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe my parents would finally understand what I did for a living. Instead, my mother's first words when she visited me in the hospital were, "Maybe this is a sign that you should consider a career change." That's when I realized that no matter what I accomplished, No matter how many lives I saved or communities I served, I would always be the daughter who had disappointed them. Carmen would always be the success story, and I would always be the cautionary tale. But I didn't let their disappointment stop me from pursuing what I loved. I threw myself into my work with renewed determination. I studied for my EMT certification, took courses in hazardous materials handling, and learned everything I could about fire prevention and emergency management. When a position opened up for a fire inspector, I applied and got it. 2 years later, I was promoted to lieutenant, then captain. Each promotion felt like a personal victory, even if it wasn't celebrated at family gatherings. The other firefighters became my chosen family. They understood the adrenaline rush of racing toward danger when everyone else was running away. They knew the satisfaction of saving a life, the heartbreak of arriving too late, and the dark humor that helped us cope with the things we saw. Captain Marcus Thompson took me under his wing early on, teaching me not just the technical aspects of firefighting but the leadership skills I'd need to advance. Sarah Mitchell, one of the few other women in the department, became like a sister to me, the kind who actually believed in what I was doing. By the time I was 30, I had risen to the rank of deputy chief. I was second in command of one of the largest fire departments in the state, overseeing training programs, budget allocation, and emergency response coordination. I had earned the respect of my peers and the trust of the community we served. When Chief Williams announced his retirement, he personally recommended me as his successor. The appointment process wasn't easy. Being a woman in a leadership position in the fire service still raised eyebrows in some circles. There were questions about my ability to command respect, concerns about my physical capabilities, and whispered doubts about whether someone my age could handle the responsibility. But my record spoke for itself. I had consistently demonstrated the skills, knowledge, and judgment necessary to lead effectively. When the mayor announced my appointment as fire chief, it was the culmination of 15 years of hard work and dedication. My parents attended the swearing-in ceremony, though they sat in the back and left immediately afterward. Carmen was in court that day, representing a client in what she described as a, quote, career-defining case. She sent flowers with a card that read, "Congratulations, Chief. Sorry I couldn't be there." It was the most acknowledgement I'd received from my family in years. As fire chief, my responsibilities extended far beyond fighting fires. I oversaw emergency medical services, coordinated disaster response efforts, managed a multi-million-dollar budget, and worked closely with other city departments and law enforcement agencies. I testified before the city council, spoke at community events, and represented our department at state and national conferences. It was challenging, rewarding work that required every skill I'd developed over my career, but none of that seemed to matter to my family. At family gatherings, the conversation always centered around Carmen's latest courtroom victory or high-profile client. When relatives asked about my work, the questions were polite but superficial, the kind you ask when you're trying to be nice but don't really understand or care about the answer. I learned to keep my responses brief and redirect the conversation to safer topics. The distance between my family and me grew wider over the years. We maintained the appearance of closeness for the sake of tradition and our parents' expectations, but the genuine connection was strained. Carmen and I spoke maybe once a month, usually brief conversations about our parents' health or upcoming family events. She never asked about my work in any meaningful way, and I stopped sharing the details of my professional life. That's why it came as such a shock when I got the call that Carmen had been arrested. The charges were serious: embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. According to the federal indictment, she had been systematically stealing from her clients' trust accounts for over 2 years, using the money to maintain her expensive lifestyle and cover gambling debts. The amounts were staggering, nearly $500,000 in total. The scandal rocked the legal community and made front-page news for weeks. My first instinct was disbelief. This was Carmen. Perfect, successful, golden child Carmen. She was the one who had done everything right, who had followed all the rules and exceeded every expectation. How could she have thrown it all away for money? But as more details emerged, a different picture began to form. The pressure to maintain her image had apparently become overwhelming. The expensive condo, the luxury car, the designer clothes, All of it was financed by credit and the expectation of continued success. When her gambling habits spiraled out of control, she had turned to her clients' money as a solution. What started as borrowing had quickly escalated into systematic theft. My parents were devastated. Their perfect daughter, their pride and joy, was facing federal prison time. They hired the best criminal defense attorney they could afford and mortgaged their house to pay for it. Family gatherings became strategy sessions focused on damage control and public relations. Everyone rallied around Carmen, offering support, making excuses, and looking for ways to minimize the consequences of her actions. And through it all, I remained the family disappointment, the one whose career couldn't be bragged about, whose accomplishments didn't count, whose presence was tolerated but not celebrated. That's what made sitting in that courtroom so surreal, despite everything. Despite years of feeling like the black sheep, I was there. I had taken time off work, rearranged my schedule, and shown up to support my sister during the worst moment of her life. Because that's what family does, even when family doesn't always return the favor. The courtroom was packed with reporters, colleagues from Carmen's firm, and family members. My parents sat in the front row, holding hands and looking older than I'd ever seen them. Carmen sat at the defendant's table next to her attorney, wearing a conservative navy suit and trying to maintain her composure. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her circumstances. I chose a seat in the back, partly because I wanted to observe without being obvious, and partly because I wasn't sure how welcome my presence would be. This was Carmen's moment, for better or worse, and I didn't want to make it about me. I had learned over the years to make myself small at family events, to take up as little space as possible, so as not to upset the delicate balance of expectations and disappointments. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The proceedings were formal and efficient. The judge read the charges, Carmen entered her plea, and the sentencing phase began. Her attorney made an impassioned argument for leniency, citing her previously clean record, her cooperation with the investigation, and the personal circumstances that had led to her poor decisions. Character witnesses testified about her volunteer work and her contributions to the community. My parents both spoke, their voices breaking as they described their daughter's fall from grace and pleaded for mercy. Through it all, I sat quietly in the back row, watching my family's world crumble while maintaining the emotional distance that had become second nature to me. This was their tragedy, their crisis, their moment of reckoning. I was just an observer, the way I'd been for most of my adult life. And then the judge announced the sentence, and everything changed. The words 18 months in federal prison hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. I watched Carmen's shoulders slump as the reality hit her. 18 months. It could have been worse. The prosecution had been pushing for 3 to 5 years, but it was still a devastating blow to someone who had built her entire identity around success and reputation. Her attorney immediately began discussing the appeals process, but I could see in Carmen's face that she had already accepted her fate. The fight had gone out of her somewhere between the investigation and the trial. This was the end of the road for the Carmen everyone thought they knew. My mother's quiet sobbing filled the momentary silence that followed the sentencing. My father sat rigid, his face a mask of controlled emotion that I recognized from my own childhood, the look he wore when things went horribly wrong, and he was trying to maintain dignity in the face of disaster. Other family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to process this new reality. The judge was preparing to move on to procedural matters, discussing when Carmen would need to report to prison, the conditions of her supervised release, and the restitution requirements, when something unexpected happened. As he shuffled through his papers, his eyes swept across the courtroom in that absent way judges do when they're transitioning between cases. But then his gaze stopped, and he looked directly at me. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent courtroom. "Ma'am, in the back row. Are you fired, Chief Rodriguez?" Every head in the courtroom turned toward me. I felt the weight of dozens of eyes, including those of my family members who suddenly looked confused and surprised. My heart started pounding, not from fear but from the unexpected attention. In all my years of feeling invisible in family settings, this was perhaps the most visible I had ever been. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, standing up out of respect for the court. Judge Harrison, I had read his nameplate when I first entered, nodded thoughtfully. "I thought I recognized you. I was at the ceremony last month, when you received the Medal of Valor from the governor. Outstanding work on that apartment complex fire in February." The courtroom was now completely silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. I could feel my family's surprise radiating from the front rows like heat from a fire. Carmen had turned around in her chair to look at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and something that might have been pride. My parents looked stunned, as if they were seeing me for the first time. "Thank you, Your Honor," I managed to say, though my throat felt dry. The Medal of Valor ceremony had been one of the proudest moments of my career, but it had also been one of the loneliest. My family hadn't attended, citing scheduling conflicts and work obligations. The governor had personally commended our department's response to a 5-alarm fire that had threatened an entire city block. We had evacuated over 200 residents and saved the lives of a family trapped on the 4th floor. It was the kind of moment that defined why I had chosen this profession. "Please, sit," Judge Harrison said with a slight smile. "I just wanted to acknowledge your service. The work you and your department do doesn't get nearly enough recognition." As I settled back into my seat, I noticed the shift in the courtroom's atmosphere. The reporters were scribbling notes, clearly intrigued by this unexpected development. My extended family members were whispering among themselves, pointing in my direction. But it was the look on my parents' faces that struck me most. A mixture of confusion, surprise, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. The proceedings continued, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. When the judge finished with the procedural matters and adjourned the court, people didn't immediately rush for the exits, as they usually do. Instead, there was a buzz of conversation, and I found myself at the center of unexpected attention. Carmen's attorney approached me first. "Chief Rodriguez, I'm David Martinez." I had no idea Carmen's sister was the fire chief. "That's incredible. I've heard amazing things about your department's work." He shook my hand with genuine enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the somber mood that had dominated the morning. A reporter from the local newspaper was next. "Chief Rodriguez, could I get a quote about today's proceedings? I'm covering the sentencing, but I'd also love to do a follow-up piece about your work with the fire department." I politely declined, explaining that I was here as a family member, not in any official capacity. But the most meaningful interaction came from an unexpected source. Judge Harrison had stepped down from the bench and was making his way through the courtroom when he stopped beside me. "Chief Rodriguez, I hope you don't mind me acknowledging you publicly," he said quietly. "I've been on this bench for 15 years, and I've seen firsthand the impact that first responders have on our community. What you and your team did during that apartment fire, getting everyone out safely while the building was collapsing around you, that's heroism in its purest form." I felt my cheeks flush. "We were just doing our job, Your Honor." "No," he said firmly. "What you did went far beyond duty. I read the incident report. You made decisions that saved lives at considerable risk to your own safety. That's not just professional competence. That's courage and leadership." As he walked away, I became aware that my family had been listening to this conversation. My mother approached me hesitantly, as if she wasn't sure she had permission to be proud. "Elena," she said softly, "we didn't know about the medal. Why didn't you tell us?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Why hadn't I told them? Because I had learned over the years that my accomplishments didn't matter to them the way Carmen's did. Because I had grown tired of sharing good news, only to have it minimized or overshadowed. Because it was easier to keep my professional victories separate from my family disappointments. "I mentioned it," I said carefully, "at Sunday dinner last month." But Carmen was talking about her big case, and the conversation moved on. My mother's face fell slightly, and I could see her trying to remember. The truth was, I had mentioned it, but only briefly. When no one had asked follow-up questions or shown much interest, I had let it drop. It was a pattern that had repeated itself countless times over the years. Carmen walked over to us then, having finished with her attorney. She looked exhausted and older than her 34 years, but there was something different in her expression when she looked at me. "Elena," she said, her voice hoarse from stress, "I had no idea about any of this. A Medal of Valor? From the governor?" I nodded, suddenly feeling awkward about discussing my achievements while she was facing prison time. It wasn't just me. The whole department was recognized. "But you were the one who led the response," my father interjected, surprising me. He had been unusually quiet, but apparently he had been paying attention to the conversations around us. The judge made that clear. Carmen looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of regret, admiration, and something that might have been shame. "I've been so wrapped up in my own world that I never really understood what you do. I thought you just fought fires." The simplicity of her statement revealed the depth of their misunderstanding. Fighting fires was indeed part of what I did, but it was such a small portion of my actual responsibilities. As fire chief, I was essentially the CEO of a complex emergency services organization. I managed personnel, budgets, equipment, and strategic planning. I coordinated with multiple agencies during disasters, testified before legislative committees on fire safety regulations, and worked with city planners on development projects. I oversaw training programs, community outreach initiatives, and disaster preparedness campaigns. But more than that, I was responsible for the safety and well-being of 63 men and women who put their lives on the line every day. I made decisions that could mean the difference between life and death, not just for the people we served, but for my own team members. The weight of that responsibility was something I carried with me every moment of every day. "There's a lot more to it than fighting fires," I said gently. "But that's part of it too, and it's important work." My Uncle Robert, my father's brother, approached our small group. He was a retired police officer who had always been one of the more supportive family members, though we didn't see each other often. "Elena," he said, extending his hand, "I should have said this years ago, but I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Public safety is a calling, not just a job, and you've clearly answered that call with distinction." His words meant more to me than I expected. Uncle Robert understood the challenges of public service in a way that the rest of my family didn't. He knew about the long hours, the difficult decisions, and the emotional toll of constantly dealing with other people's worst days. As we stood there in the courthouse hallway, with Carmen facing an uncertain future and our family grappling with a new reality, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in my adult life, my family was seeing me not as the daughter who had disappointed them, but as someone who had achieved something meaningful and important. The irony wasn't lost on me that it had taken Carmen's downfall to highlight my own accomplishments. While she was losing everything she had worked for, I was finally being recognized for everything I had built. It should have felt like vindication, but instead, it felt bittersweet. My mother touched my arm gently. "Elena, would you tell us about the apartment fire? The one the judge mentioned?" For a moment, I hesitated. This wasn't the time or place for war stories, especially not with Carmen facing prison time. But there was something in my mother's expression, a genuine desire to understand, perhaps for the first time, what her daughter actually did for a living. "It was a 5-alarm fire in the Riverside district," I began carefully. "An old apartment building with faulty wiring. The fire started in the basement and spread quickly through the walls. By the time we arrived, the building was fully involved, and we had reports of people trapped on the upper floors." Carmen listened intently, her legal troubles momentarily forgotten. "How many people were inside?" "We evacuated over 200 residents," I continued. "But there was a family on the 4th floor, a mother and 3 children, who couldn't get out because the stairwell was blocked by debris. The elevator shaft was acting like a chimney, pulling the fire upward." My father frowned. "How did you get them out?" "We used the ladder truck to reach their window, but the ladder was too short, so I made the decision to bring them down through the building." I paused, remembering the heat, the smoke, the sound of the building groaning around us. "We created a safe corridor using positive pressure ventilation and had teams stationed every floor to guide them down." "But the judge said the building was collapsing," my mother said, her voice tight with concern. "Parts of it were," I admitted. We lost the entire back section about 10 minutes after we got everyone out. If we had waited for additional equipment or a different approach, that family wouldn't have made it. The hallway had grown quieter as other people filtered out of the courthouse, but our family remained clustered together, processing this new information about who I was and what I did. For years, they had seen my work as somehow less important than Carmen's legal career, but now they were beginning to understand the stakes involved in my daily decisions. Carmen was crying again, but these weren't the tears of self-pity that had marked the earlier proceedings. These were different. Tears of realization, perhaps, or regret for the years of taking her sister for granted. "I'm so sorry, Elena," she whispered. "I've been such a terrible sister. I was so focused on my own success that I never bothered to learn about yours." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with years of missed opportunities and misunderstood priorities. This was the sister I had grown up with, the one I had looked up to and tried to impress, finally seeing me as I really was, rather than as the disappointment she had always assumed me to be. "We both made choices," I said quietly. "You don't need to apologize for building the life you wanted." "But I do," she insisted. "Because I built it on lies and theft, while you were building something real and meaningful. You save lives, Elena. Every day, you make a difference that actually matters. And I've been too selfish and stupid to see it." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a woman I didn't recognize, an older lady with silver hair and a kind face. She had been sitting in the gallery during the proceedings, and I had assumed she was another family member or friend of Carmen's. "Excuse me," she said politely. "Are you Chief Rodriguez?" I nodded, wondering who she might be. "My name is Margaret Thompson. My grandson is Marcus Thompson. I believe you know him?" The name clicked immediately. Marcus Thompson was one of my captains, a 15-year veteran who had been instrumental in training new recruits. He was also one of the firefighters I had helped rescue during that warehouse collapse early in my career. "Of course," I said, smiling genuinely for the first time that day. "Captain Thompson is one of our best. How is he?" "He's doing wonderfully, thanks in large part to you," Mrs. Thompson replied. "He's told me so many stories about your leadership and the way you've supported your team. When I heard your name mentioned in court today, I had to come introduce myself and thank you personally." She turned to address my family. "I hope you know how fortunate you are to have Chief Rodriguez. My grandson tells me she's the finest fire chief this county has ever had, and the respect she commands from her officers is remarkable." My parents exchanged glances, clearly moved by this unexpected testimony from a stranger. Here was someone who knew me only through my professional reputation, yet she spoke with more pride and admiration than my own family had ever expressed. As Mrs. Thompson walked away, my father cleared his throat awkwardly. "Elena, we clearly have a lot to learn about what you do. Would you be willing to show us? Maybe give us a tour of the fire station sometime?" The offer caught me off guard. In 8 years as fire chief, my parents had never once visited my workplace or asked to see what I did. They had attended Carmen's office parties and law firm events, but they had never shown any interest in my professional environment. "I'd like that," I said simply. Carmen stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena, I know I'm going to prison, and I know I've destroyed everything I worked for, but I want you to know that right now, in this moment, I'm prouder to be your sister than I've ever been of anything I accomplished." Her words broke something open inside me that I had kept carefully sealed for years. This was the validation I had never known I needed, coming at the moment when I least expected it, and from the person whose opinion had always mattered most. The ride home from the courthouse was unlike any family car ride I had experienced in years. Instead of the usual awkward small talk or heavy silence, my parents peppered me with questions about my work. They wanted to know about the structure of the fire department, the types of emergencies we handled, and the training required for different positions. For the first time in my adult life, they seemed genuinely interested in understanding my career rather than simply tolerating it. My mother, who had always worried about the dangers of my job without really comprehending what those dangers entailed, asked detailed questions about safety protocols and equipment. My father, ever the practical businessman, was fascinated by the budget management and administrative aspects of running a large emergency services department. They were seeing me through new eyes, and I was seeing them through new eyes as well, not as people who had never cared about my accomplishments, but as people who had simply never understood what those accomplishments meant. When we arrived at my parents' house, the entire extended family had gathered for what was supposed to be a somber post-sentencing meal. Instead, the atmosphere was charged with curiosity and a strange kind of energy I had never associated with family gatherings. Word had spread quickly about what had happened in the courtroom, and suddenly everyone wanted to hear about my career. My cousin Maria, who worked as a nurse and had always been one of the more supportive family members, cornered me in the kitchen. "Elena? I can't believe we never knew about all this. A Medal of Valor? That's incredible. What else haven't you told us?" It was a fair question, and one that forced me to reflect on how much of my professional life I had kept separate from my family relationships. There had been so many moments over the years: commendations, promotions, successful rescues, community awards, that I had either downplayed or not mentioned at all, because I had learned that they wouldn't be received with the enthusiasm I hoped for. "There's been a lot," I admitted, "but you know how it is at family gatherings. The conversation always seemed to focus on other things." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "We've been terrible, haven't we? So wrapped up in Carmen's success that we never bothered to really ask about yours." Before I could respond, my nephew Jamie, Carmen's 16-year-old son, approached us. He had been unusually quiet since the sentencing, clearly struggling to process his mother's situation and what it meant for his future. "Aunt Elena," he said hesitantly, "could you tell me more about being a firefighter? I mean, I know you're the chief now, but did you start as a regular firefighter?" I spent the next hour sitting with Jamie, explaining the career progression in the fire service and sharing stories about my early days on the force. He was particularly interested in the technical aspects of firefighting and emergency medical response. As we talked, I realized that he was dealing with a lot more than just his mother's legal troubles. He was grappling with questions about integrity, purpose, and what it meant to build a life worth living. "The thing about this job," I told him, "is that it's not really about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. Every time we respond to a call, there's risk involved. But we train constantly, we work as a team, and we focus on the mission rather than the fear." Jamie listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about the training process and the different specializations within the fire service. It occurred to me that in all the years of family gatherings, no one had ever asked me to explain my work in such detail. I had grown accustomed to giving brief, surface-level answers because that's what seemed to be expected. My Uncle Robert joined our conversation, bringing with him a perspective informed by his own career in public safety. "Elena, I've been thinking about what happened in court today, and I want to apologize. As someone who worked in law enforcement, I should have understood the value of what you do better than anyone. But I got caught up in the family dynamic, and I never gave you the recognition you deserved." His words carried weight because Uncle Robert had always been one of the more respected voices in our family. His acknowledgement felt like a validation not just of my career, but of the choices I had made along the way. "I remember when you first joined the fire department," he continued. "Everyone was worried that you were making a mistake, that you were throwing away your potential. But looking at what you've accomplished, it's clear that you found exactly where you belonged." The conversation was interrupted by a phone call that I initially ignored. But when it rang a second time, I checked the caller ID. It was Deputy Chief Anderson, my second in command, and he wouldn't call unless it was important. "Excuse me," I said to Uncle Robert and Jamie, stepping into the hallway to take the call. "Chief, sorry to bother you," Anderson's voice crackled through the phone. "But we've got a situation developing. There's a hazmat incident at the industrial complex on Highway 9. Chemical spill from a truck accident. The County Emergency Management Coordinator is requesting your direct oversight." I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with emergency calls. This was what I had been trained for, what I lived for, the moment when all the preparation and planning crystallized into action. "What's the scope?" I asked, already mentally shifting into command mode. "3-vehicle collision involving a tanker truck carrying industrial solvents. Driver's unconscious. Unknown quantity of material released. We've established a preliminary perimeter. but we need to determine evacuation protocols for the surrounding area. I'm 20 minutes out, I said. Implement Level B protocols and keep everyone upwind. Contact the State Environmental Response Team and get me a direct line to the hospital. I'll coordinate with County Emergency Management en route. As I hung up the phone, I realized my family had been listening to the conversation. They looked concerned, but also intrigued by the transformation they had witnessed. The way I had instantly shifted from family gathering mode to emergency command mode. "You have to go?" my mother asked, worry evident in her voice. "It's a chemical spill," I explained, already heading toward the door. "Potentially dangerous situation that requires immediate response." Carmen, who had been sitting quietly in the living room, stood up as I passed. "Elena, be careful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't lose you, too." Her words stopped me in my tracks. In all our years as sisters, through all the distance and misunderstanding, Carmen had never expressed fear for my safety in such a direct way. She had always seemed to view my job as an abstract concept rather than something that involved real danger. "I'll be fine," I assured her. "This is what we train for." "But you'll be in charge of the whole operation?" my father asked, still trying to grasp the scope of my responsibilities. "Yes," I said simply. "When there's a major incident like this, the fire chief coordinates the overall response. Multiple agencies, multiple resources, complex decision-making." As I headed for my vehicle, Uncle Robert called out, "Elena, would it be possible for some of us to follow at a safe distance? Not to interfere, but just to see you in action." The request surprised me, but I could see the genuine interest in their faces. They wanted to understand what I did, to see firsthand the work that had defined my adult life. "You can observe from the command post area," I said, "but you'll need to stay exactly where the personnel tell you and follow all safety protocols." The drive to the incident scene was surreal. In my rearview mirror, I could see my father's car following behind me, carrying family members who had never shown interest in my work but were now eager to witness it firsthand. Part of me felt nervous about having them there, not because I doubted my abilities, but because I wasn't sure how they would react to seeing the complexity and intensity of emergency operations. When I arrived at the scene, the organized chaos of a major incident response was already in motion. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, and hazmat vehicles lined the highway. The tanker truck lay on its side, a plume of vapor rising from the point of rupture in the tank. My personnel had established a perimeter and were systematically implementing our response protocols. Deputy Chief Anderson met me at the command vehicle, his expression serious but controlled. "Chief, we've got the driver out and transported to the hospital. Preliminary assessment suggests we're dealing with methylene chloride, highly toxic, potential for respiratory damage. Wind direction is favorable, but there are residential areas within the potential impact zone." I quickly reviewed the incident command structure that had been established in my absence. The scene was divided into clear zones: hot zone where the actual hazmat response was taking place, warm zone for decontamination and support operations, and cold zone for command and staging. Each zone had specific access controls and safety requirements. "What's our evacuation status?" I asked, pulling on my command vest and connecting my radio. "We've cleared a half-mile radius as a precaution," Anderson replied. "County Emergency Management is coordinating temporary shelter at the community center. Environmental Response Team is en route with specialized containment equipment." I surveyed the scene, processing multiple streams of information simultaneously. Weather conditions, wind patterns, population density, available resources, potential environmental impact, dozens of variables that needed to be weighed and balanced in real-time decision-making. "Expand the perimeter to 3/4 of a mile," I ordered. "Better to err on the side of caution until we have definitive air quality readings. And I want continuous monitoring at the perimeter boundaries." From the corner of my eye, I could see my family standing at the designated observation area, watching as I moved through the command sequence. They were far enough away to be safe, but close enough to observe the operation. I wondered what they were thinking as they watched me coordinate resources, make decisions, and manage what was essentially a small-scale disaster response. Over the next 2 hours, I directed the systematic containment and cleanup of the chemical spill. It involved coordinating with multiple agencies, managing complex logistics, and making decisions that affected the safety of both my personnel and the surrounding community. The work required every skill I had developed over my career: technical knowledge, leadership ability, strategic thinking, and crisis management. When the immediate danger had passed and the cleanup was well underway, I finally had a moment to check on my family. They were still standing in the observation area, looking somewhat stunned by what they had witnessed. "That was incredible," Jamie said as I approached. "I had no idea it was so complicated." My mother looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of pride, concern, and newfound respect. "Elena, watching you work out there, you were in complete control of everything. All those people, all that equipment, all those decisions, and they were all looking at you." My father nodded slowly. "I've managed business operations for 30 years, but nothing like that. The scope of responsibility, the complexity of coordination, it's remarkable." Carmen had tears in her eyes again, but these were different from the tears she had shed in the courtroom. "Elena, I've been so wrong about everything. Watching you out there, seeing the way everyone respects you and trusts your judgment, you're not just successful, you're essential. What you do matters in ways I never understood." Her words hit me harder than I expected. This was the sister whose approval I had sought for so many years, finally understanding not just what I did, but why it mattered. The irony that it had taken her own professional downfall to open her eyes to my accomplishments wasn't lost on me, but it didn't diminish the significance of the moment. "We all make different choices," I said quietly. "Today was a good day. Everyone went home safe, the environment is protected, and the community is secure. That's what matters to me." Uncle Robert stepped forward, his law enforcement background giving him a deeper appreciation for what he had witnessed. "Elena, what I saw out there was true leadership under pressure. The way you processed information, made decisions, and coordinated resources, that's executive-level management in the most challenging circumstances imaginable." As we stood there in the fading afternoon light, with the emergency vehicles beginning to clear the scene and normal traffic starting to resume, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with my family. For the first time in my adult life, they were seeing me not as the daughter who had disappointed them by choosing an unconventional path, but as someone who had found her calling and excelled at it in ways they were only beginning to understand. The validation felt both overwhelming and long overdue. But more than that, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter in our family story. One where my accomplishments would be valued alongside Carmen's, where my choices would be respected rather than merely tolerated, and where the distance that had grown between us over the years might finally begin to close. The weeks following Carmen's sentencing and the hazmat incident became a period of unexpected reconnection with my family. My parents followed through on their request to visit the fire station, and what was supposed to be a brief tour turned into a 3-hour exploration of our facilities and operations. My mother was fascinated by the emergency medical equipment and the paramedic training programs, while my father peppered me with questions about budget allocation, personnel management, and the logistics of maintaining readiness across multiple stations. "I never realized the scope of infrastructure required," he said as we walked through the apparatus bay, examining the specialized vehicles and equipment. "This is essentially a complex business operation with life-or-death consequences." Captain Sarah Mitchell, who had been my mentor early in my career and was now one of my most trusted officers, gave them a demonstration of our rescue equipment. She explained the technical aspects of hydraulic tools, rope rescue systems, and advanced life support protocols. Watching my parents' faces as they absorbed this information was revelatory. They were finally understanding that my work involved sophisticated technology, extensive training, and high-level decision-making. "Chief Rodriguez revolutionized our training programs," Captain Mitchell told them. "Under her leadership, we've achieved response time improvements of nearly 20% and established partnerships with regional hospitals that have enhanced our emergency medical capabilities." My mother looked at me with surprise. "You developed these programs yourself?" "It's collaborative," I explained. But yes, as chief, I oversee the strategic planning for all our operations. We analyze response data, identify areas for improvement, and implement new protocols. It's constant evolution based on changing needs and emerging best practices. The station tour also included a demonstration of our dispatch system, which my nephew Jamie found particularly intriguing. He had decided to spend more time with me in the weeks since his mother's sentencing, partly because he was struggling with her absence, but also because he was genuinely interested in emergency services. The dispatcher walked him through the computer-aided dispatch technology, showing how calls were prioritized, resources allocated, and response coordinates calculated in real time. It's like a video game, Jamie observed, except the consequences are real. Exactly, I said. Every decision we make here affects real people having the worst day of their lives. That's why we train constantly and why every protocol exists for a specific reason. During this period, Carmen's situation continued to unfold. She had been ordered to report to federal prison in 6 weeks, and she was using the time to settle her affairs and prepare for incarceration. But she was also using it to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by years of self-absorption and misplaced priorities. She called me regularly, asking about my work and expressing genuine interest in hearing about my daily challenges and successes. "Elena," she said during one of our phone conversations, "I've been thinking about what the judge said in court about the Medal of Valor. Will you tell me exactly what happened during that apartment fire?" I had touched on the incident briefly during our family gathering, but Carmen wanted details, so I told her about the tactical decisions involved, the risk assessment we had conducted, and the split-second timing that had made the difference between a successful rescue and a tragedy. I explained how we had used positive pressure ventilation to create a safe corridor, how we had positioned teams strategically throughout the building, and how we had coordinated with the ladder company to ensure backup evacuation routes. "You could have died," Carmen said quietly when I finished. "That's always a possibility in this job," I replied. "But we train for these scenarios, we work as a team, and we have safety protocols in place. The risk is managed, not eliminated." "But you made the decision to go in," she pressed, "even though it was dangerous." "Because not going in would have meant certain death for that family," I said. "When you weigh known risk against certain tragedy, the choice becomes clear." Carmen was quiet for a long moment. "I made so many choices based on what was easy or what benefited me personally. You make choices based on what's right, even when it's dangerous. I'm starting to understand the difference between success and significance." Her words reflected a maturity and self-awareness that I hadn't seen from her before. Prison was still looming, but she was using this time to genuinely examine her life and her values. She had begun volunteering at a legal aid clinic, providing free assistance to low-income clients who couldn't afford representation. It was pro bono work that wouldn't advance her career or enhance her reputation. It was simply the right thing to do. Meanwhile, the recognition I had received at the courthouse had sparked interest from several quarters I hadn't expected. The local newspaper ran a feature story about my career and the fire department's recent achievements. A regional fire chiefs association invited me to speak at their annual conference about leadership strategies in emergency services. The State Fire Training Academy asked me to serve on a committee developing new curriculum standards. Most significantly, the mayor approached me about expanding my role in the city's emergency management structure. There had been discussions about creating a unified public safety director position that would oversee police, fire, and emergency management operations. It would be a significant promotion with increased responsibilities and a substantial salary increase, but it would also mean less direct involvement in day-to-day fire operations. "It's a recognition of your leadership capabilities," Mayor Davidson explained during our meeting. "Your performance during the chemical spill incident demonstrated exactly the kind of coordinated thinking we need for this role." I asked for time to consider the offer, partly because it was a major career decision, but also because I wanted to discuss it with my family. The irony wasn't lost on me that for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I could actually talk to them about professional opportunities and career choices. When I brought up the mayor's offer during Sunday dinner, the response was enthusiastic and supportive in ways I had never experienced. My father immediately began analyzing the strategic advantages of the position, while my mother expressed pride that I was being considered for such a significant role. This would make you one of the most senior emergency management officials in the state, Uncle Robert observed. The scope of responsibility would be enormous. Carmen, who was joining family dinners regularly now as she prepared for prison, looked at me with admiration. Elena, this is incredible. You've built something amazing, and people are recognizing it. But it was Jamie who asked the most perceptive question. Aunt Elena, do you want the job? I mean, it sounds important, but would it make you happy? His question cut to the heart of the matter. The promotion would be a significant professional achievement, but it would also distance me from the hands-on aspects of firefighting that had drawn me to the profession in the first place. As public safety director, I would be more focused on policy, budgets, and administrative coordination than on emergency response. I'm not sure, I admitted. It's an honor to be considered, but I need to think about whether it aligns with what I want to do with my career. My mother reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture of support that surprised me. Whatever you decide, we'll be proud of you, she said. We should have been saying that all along. The family dynamics that had been established over decades were slowly but fundamentally changing. Carmen's legal troubles had served as a catalyst, forcing everyone to reevaluate their assumptions and priorities. For the first time in years, our family gatherings felt genuine rather than obligatory. This transformation was particularly evident in Jamie's relationship with both Carmen and me. He was struggling with his mother's impending incarceration, but he was also discovering new possibilities for his own future. He had begun volunteering with our department's youth outreach program, learning about emergency preparedness and considering a career in public safety. I never thought about firefighting as a real option before, he told me as we worked together on a community safety presentation. But watching you work, seeing what you've accomplished, it seems like something worth doing. I was careful not to push him in any particular direction, but I encouraged his interest and made sure he understood the full scope of opportunities in emergency services. There were paths that led to federal agencies, specialized rescue teams, fire investigation, emergency management, and dozens of other specializations. It wasn't just about fighting fires, though that remained an important and honorable calling. As Carmen's reporting date approached, our family rallied around her in ways that demonstrated how much had changed since her sentencing. Instead of focusing on the shame and disappointment of her situation, we were supporting her efforts to make amends and prepare for her period of incarceration. She had liquidated her assets to pay restitution to her victims, enrolled in a financial responsibility program, and arranged for Jamie to live with my parents while she was away. I know I destroyed my legal career, she told me during one of our conversations, but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. I was so focused on winning and making money that I lost sight of why I became a lawyer in the first place. When I get out, I want to do work that actually helps people. Her transformation was genuine, but it was also painful to watch. She was facing the consequences of her choices with dignity, but the weight of those consequences was enormous. She would emerge from prison as a convicted felon, unable to practice law, and struggling to rebuild her life from the ground up. 3 weeks before Carmen's reporting date, an incident occurred that brought our new family dynamic into sharp focus. I was at home on a rare evening off when I received an emergency call about a structure fire in a residential neighborhood. The initial report indicated that it was a significant blaze with possible entrapment, so I responded to provide on-scene command support. When I arrived, I found a fully involved house fire with neighbors reporting that an elderly man was still inside. My crews were already implementing an aggressive interior attack, but the conditions were deteriorating rapidly. The incident commander on scene briefed me quickly. They had located the victim but were having difficulty getting him out due to his mobility limitations and the structural damage caused by the fire. I made the decision to enter the structure with the rescue team, not because it was required of my position, but because my experience and training could make a difference in the outcome. As fire chief, I could have remained in the command position, but this was a situation where leadership meant being present at the point of greatest risk. We found the elderly man, Walter Harrison, unconscious from smoke inhalation in a back bedroom. The ceiling was compromised, and we had limited time before a full collapse. Working together, we were able to get him out of the building and into the hands of paramedics just as the roof structure failed. Mr. Harrison survived, thanks to the quick response and coordinated efforts of multiple teams. But what made this incident particularly meaningful was that my family witnessed it. Jamie had been at my house working on a school project when the call came in, and he had followed me to the scene with my parents' permission. They arrived just as we were bringing Mr. Harrison out of the building. Standing in my turnout gear, covered in soot and sweat, I saw my nephew looking at me with an expression of awe and respect that I had never seen before. My parents, who had followed behind him, were watching with a mixture of pride and terror as they realized how close I had come to serious injury. "Elena," my mother said when I approached them after the scene was secure, "I finally understand what you do. Not just the technical aspects or the management responsibilities, but the core of it. You run toward danger so other people can be safe." Her words captured something essential about my calling that I had never been able to articulate to them before. It wasn't about seeking danger or proving courage. It was about accepting responsibility for other people's safety and being willing to act when action was required. Jamie stood beside her, still processing what he had witnessed. "Aunt Elena, that was the most important thing I've ever seen anyone do." His simple statement carried more weight than any commendation or award I had ever received. In that moment, I realized that the recognition I had always sought from my family wasn't about validation of my career choices. It was about being seen and understood for who I really was and what I stood for. The incident also crystallized my decision about the mayor's offer. While the public safety director position would be a significant career advancement, my true calling remained in direct emergency response and hands-on leadership. I was a firefighter first, an administrator second, and that priority would guide my professional choices going forward. As we stood outside the still-smoking house, watching the overhaul operations and ensuring that the fire was completely extinguished, I felt a sense of completeness that had been missing from my life for years. My family finally understood and respected my work, my relationship with Carmen was healing, and I was clear about my professional direction. The journey from being seen as the family disappointment to being recognized as someone whose work had genuine significance had been long and sometimes painful. But standing there with my nephew looking at me like I was a hero, and my parents finally understanding the value of what I did, I realized that the wait had been worth it. The day Carmen reported to federal prison was one of the most emotionally complex days our family had ever experienced. We gathered at my parents' house early that morning, ostensibly for breakfast, but really to spend these final hours together before she began serving her sentence. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken emotions. Grief for what had been lost, hope for what might be rebuilt, and a strange sense of closure that none of us had anticipated. Carmen looked different than she had during the trial. The expensive suits and carefully styled hair had been replaced by simple clothing and a more natural appearance. But more than her physical transformation, there was something fundamentally changed in her demeanor. The desperate ambition that had driven her for so many years had been replaced by a quiet acceptance and a clarity of purpose that I had never seen in her before. "I need to tell you all something before I go," she said as we sat around the kitchen table where we had shared so many family meals over the years. "These past few months have taught me things about myself and about all of you that I should have learned years ago. Elena, especially, I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than anything I've said before." She turned to face me directly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I spent so many years being jealous of you without even realizing it. I thought I was the successful one, the one who had made something of herself, but you were the one who had actually found meaning in your work. You were saving lives while I was chasing money. You were building something that mattered while I was building something that could collapse at any moment." Her words hung in the air, carrying the weight of years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities, but they also carried something else, a recognition that went beyond simple acknowledgement of my accomplishments. She was seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. "When I get out," she continued, "I want to do something that matters. I don't know what yet, but I want to find work that serves others the way yours does. You've shown me what real success looks like." My parents were crying openly now, not just for Carmen's situation, but for the years of family dynamics that had prevented us from truly seeing and supporting each other. My father, who had always been sparing with emotional expressions, reached across the table and took my hand. "Elena, we failed you," he said simply. We were so focused on conventional measures of success that we couldn't see the extraordinary thing you were building. You became a leader, a protector, someone who makes the world safer for everyone else's children. We should have been celebrating that all along. The drive to the federal prison was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Jamie sat beside his mother, holding her hand and trying to be strong, despite his own fears about the months ahead. My parents followed in their car, while I drove Carmen and Jamie in mine. The landscape outside was ordinary. Suburban neighborhoods giving way to rural areas, but the journey felt monumental. At the prison gates, we had our final moments together as a complete family. The restrictions meant that only immediate family could accompany Carmen to the actual reporting point, so our extended goodbyes happened in the parking lot. Uncle Robert and several cousins had made the drive to see her off, creating a circle of support that demonstrated how much our family relationships had evolved over the past few months. "Take care of each other," Carmen said, embracing each person individually. When she reached me, she held on longer than the others. "Elena, promise me you'll keep being amazing. Don't let our years of not appreciating you make you doubt yourself for even a moment." After Carmen disappeared through the prison entrance, we drove home in a convoy of family vehicles, each of us processing the experience differently. Jamie was stoic but clearly struggling, my parents were emotionally drained, and I felt a complex mixture of sadness and hope. The sister I'd grown up with was gone, but the sister I'd discovered over the past few months, the one who truly saw and valued me, would be waiting when she returned. Over the following weeks, our family settled into new routines that reflected our changed relationships. Jamie spent more time at the fire station, officially joining our youth volunteer program and excelling in both the academic and practical components. My parents became regular attendees at city council meetings where public safety issues were discussed, finally understanding the political and budgetary aspects of my work. Most significantly, I made my decision about the mayor's offer. I declined the public safety director position, choosing instead to remain as fire chief while taking on additional responsibilities for regional emergency planning. It was a compromise that allowed me to maintain my hands-on role while contributing to broader policy development. "I'm proud of your decision," my mother told me when I explained my reasoning. "You're following your passion rather than just chasing a promotion. That takes wisdom." The validation from my family continued to feel surreal after so many years of feeling undervalued, but I was learning to accept it gracefully. More importantly, I was discovering that their respect and understanding enhanced my own satisfaction with my work rather than defining it. I had built a meaningful career based on my own values and calling, and their recognition was a bonus rather than a necessity. 6 months after Carmen's incarceration, our family received news that brought everything full circle. The state fire marshal's office announced that I had been selected to receive the Distinguished Service Award, the highest honor given to fire service personnel in our state. The award recognized not just my response to specific incidents, but my overall contribution to fire safety, emergency preparedness, and professional development over my entire career. The award ceremony was held at the state capitol, with representatives from fire departments across the state in attendance. For the first time in my professional life, my entire family was present to witness my recognition. My parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride that was obvious to everyone around them. Jamie wore his volunteer firefighter uniform, having officially joined our department as a junior member. Even Carmen, who had been granted special permission to attend, was there in the audience. When my name was called and I walked to the podium to accept the award, I could see my family in the audience and feel the weight of their support in a way I had never experienced before. The citation read aloud by the state fire marshal detailed my contributions to emergency response, my leadership during major incidents, and my role in developing training programs that had been adopted by departments statewide. "Chief Rodriguez represents the finest traditions of the fire service," the fire marshal said. "Her commitment to excellence, her courage under pressure, and her dedication to protecting others have made communities across our state safer. She is a leader, a mentor, and an inspiration to all who serve in emergency response." As I accepted the award, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the young woman who had disappointed her family by choosing an unconventional career to the fire chief being honored for distinguished service, the path had been long and sometimes difficult, but it had led exactly where I belonged. In my acceptance speech, I spoke about the importance of supporting young people who choose careers in public service. regardless of whether those careers fit traditional expectations of success. I talked about the nobility of work that serves others and the satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful rather than just profitable. Every person who chooses to serve others, whether as a firefighter, police officer, paramedic, teacher, or in any other helping profession, deserves our respect and support, I said. These careers may not always lead to wealth or conventional measures of success, but they lead to something more important, the knowledge that your life's work makes a difference. After the ceremony, as we gathered for a family dinner to celebrate, Carmen pulled me aside for a private conversation. She looked healthier than she had in months, and there was a peace in her expression that I hadn't seen since we were children. Elena, watching you receive that award today, seeing the respect and admiration from your colleagues, finally understanding what you've built, I realized something important. I spent so many years thinking I was the successful sister, but you were always the one who had it figured out. You found work that aligned with your values, and you excelled at it because you believed in it. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When I get out, I want to find that for myself. I don't know what it will look like yet, but I want to build something meaningful the way you did. As I looked around the restaurant at my family, my parents discussing fire department operations with genuine interest, Jamie planning his future in emergency services, Carmen talking about rebuilding her life around service to others, I realized that the recognition I had received that day wasn't just personal. It had helped transform our entire family's understanding of what constituted a life well lived. The judge who had recognized me in that courthouse months ago had set in motion a chain of events that changed everything. But the real transformation hadn't happened because of external recognition. It had happened because my family finally took the time to truly see and understand the work I had been doing all along. Years later, when Carmen was released from prison and began working for a nonprofit legal aid organization, when Jamie graduated from the fire academy and joined our department as a rookie firefighter, when my parents became active advocates for public safety funding, I would look back on that day in the courthouse as the moment when everything changed. It wasn't the moment I became successful. I had been building that success for years. It was the moment my family finally understood what I had been trying to show them all along, that success isn't measured only in salary figures or social status, but in the impact you have on others and the integrity with which you live your life. The girl who had been called a disappointment had become a woman whose work protected entire communities. The sister who had been overshadowed had become a leader whose influence extended far beyond her own department. The daughter who had chosen an unconventional path had proven that sometimes the road less traveled leads to exactly where you're meant to be. Standing in that courthouse, hearing Judge Harrison say, "You're the fire chief," had been more than a moment of recognition. It had been the beginning of my family's journey toward understanding that there are many ways to build a meaningful life, and that the work of protecting and serving others is among the most honorable of all callings. The fire chief badge I wore represented more than my professional achievement. It represented the validation that comes not from others' approval, but from the knowledge that you have found your calling and pursued it with excellence, integrity, and unwavering commitment to something larger than yourself. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.